Hello and welcome to First Contact, the world's first podcast where we openly discuss all things relating to humanity's preparation for open contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. I'm your host, Isha Patel. If you are loving this content, please be sure to join us in the First Contact Facebook community and let us know what you think. Let's dive into another exciting episode of First Contact. Hey everyone, and welcome to First Contact. I'm your host, Isha Patel, and today we have Bill Konkolesky. Now, the reason why I really wanted to have a chat with Bill is that one, he's been working with MUFON, and we all know that the people in MUFON have a lot of experiences, listening to other people's experiences, but also very direct experiences as well. Now, Bill's story is quite interesting. He does work at the MUFON chapter as a state director in Michigan, and he's had a lot of his own personal experiences with UFOs as well. So I'm really curious today with Bill to get into a little bit of his personal experiences, as well as sharing some of the biggest UFO sightings in his area, because from what he tells me, there's apparently some really great ones. So I'm really keen to get started. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me on.
You are most welcome. This is going to be exciting conversation. So now one of the first things I want to just touch upon before we go into a deep dive into specific stories and cases, there is quite a shift happening at the moment in the ufology space, and particularly with legislation. There's a Senate hearing coming up this month, actually, a public hearing for people who are interested in this topic. Do you have any insights around the government and military handling of UFOs, particularly with what's happening in current news?
When you look at how they're handling it, it's very interesting. They start off by showing you videos of UFOs that, leaked or maybe not so much leaked, of UFOs out over the Atlantic Ocean, out over the Pacific Ocean, nothing over the continental United States. It's just a way to sort of test the public. How do they feel about UFO sightings anywhere? What they didn't show was like UFOs over Chicago or something like that, that might really upset or confuse people. And this current round of interest in UFOs, I think, is a way to get ahead of the topic. I think currently, if something were to happen big in this space, that what people would do is claim that the government and the military never told them what was going on, that they were keeping secrets. But with these very small, minor offerings that the government and military has done so far and continues to do, that say a UFO lands somewhere prominent, like the White House lawn in 10 years, and people say, oh my gosh, you've been hiding this stuff from us, haven't you? And they'd be like, no, look at all these public hearings that we've had. Look at all these reports that we've put out. And the thing about these reports that they put out, first of all, in that first one, they're like, well, we have 144 sightings from what we consider to be verifiable sources. And we've been able to identify one. The other 143, we don't know what it is. And then the public never hears any more about that majority that they can't identify. And now by the time they're on to the second one, it's 510 sightings. Still, most of them, they don't know what it is. And that's not reassuring. That's kind of clumsy. It's kind of awkward. If anybody saw the open hearing that they had last year, 90 minutes, where the Department of Defense was asked all sorts of questions, it really seemed like they were not ready to handle these questions. And when asked about previous efforts to look into the UFO phenomena, one of the gentlemen seemed to be vaguely familiar with the Project Blue Book, the big Air Force UFO investigation effort that went on from 52 to 69. Didn't seem to be aware of Project Sign or Project Rudge, any of the other projects. The other guy said something random about Roswell, and it just really felt like amateur hour. The benefit for MUFON about something like this is Representative Andre Carson, who asked several questions. Many, if not all of the questions that he asked were provided to him from MUFON. So we're kind of happy about that, to have some skin in the game at this level. But I think that they're just putting out a bare minimum of information so that when it becomes obvious that something's happening, that they'll have something to hold on to and say, look, we're on your side. We've been telling you what we know. Another interesting thing I think that the government's been doing is this rebranding of the phenomena. It's
Mm,
almost like if you don't call these things UAP, then you're sitting at the kids' table. They rebrand it so they own the phenomena now. Like they're suddenly the experts and they're the go-to for information on this. Glad that they're talking about it. Glad that they've sort of removed the giggle factor. It's very easy for me now in a conversation when somebody says, "Oh, UFOs, that's so silly." I'm like, "Why is the government dumping millions of dollars into this?" And so that is admittedly helpful. And this is all not even touching this strange balloon thing that happened recently. Over the course of just a few days, all of these mystery objects were shot down, and the government and military never talked about it again.
mhm.
The one that happened that involved my state, first of all, seen over Montana, then Wisconsin, then Lake Michigan, then Michigan itself, then shot down over Lake Huron. Descriptions were that it was some sort of octagonal shape, and then that was it. No idea what it was. They didn't seem to retrieve it.
Did you receive
And
any reports of this through MUFON?
no, no.
That's very interesting. I did speak with
Mhm.
someone in the area as well. And one of the things that she said to me was that there was a lot of EMF around the area. People were reporting different symptoms, headaches, measurable EMF. Again, I mean, I'm
Mm.
still researching this, so I don't know exactly what's true and what's not. I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
Hadn't heard that specifically. No. Um,
Okay.
and when, after these things were shot down, then suddenly none others were shot down. You would think that if this was some mysterious object over the US, that the way that the Air Force would handle it is that they would privately investigate it, not publicly announce it. If they were going to take it down, maybe not make such a big production of it. It just really seemed like it built a lot of tension and suspense in this country, and then no follow-up. The topic
Yeah.
just went away, much like, the previous reports that, were left wanting, much like the open congressional hearing last year, which was underwhelming. It
Mm,
really to be in the UFO community now that I have been for 30 years, part of MUFON and a great interest, in my younger years prior to that, I'm like, this is not how you get into the game. You know, this is not how you step in and say that you're any sort of authority. It feels convoluted. It feels controlled. It feels like it doesn't feel sincere. The whole thing is so disingenuous the way it's being run.
yeah.
I'm not one of those big people that say, government conspiracy this, government conspiracy that, because as a state director of a MUFON chapter in Michigan, we get about 200 sightings a year just in Michigan.
Mhm.
And so I have my hands full, my plate full all the time with local people talking about what they've seen. I don't need to hear from the government or the military about any sort of validity about this subject. I see it all the time. I've seen it firsthand, and I hear it all the time from people that I know and trust and meet on a regular basis. This sort of government military thing is its own track. It's amusing, but I'm waiting for, it's kind of like that old 1980s Wendy's commercial. Where's the beef? I'm just waiting for something substantial to come out of this. Again, it's nice to say that they're looking into it. That's a boost, but what they've produced so far is not exciting, not yet.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you and I share very similar sentiment around what's been happening. There was a moment, a couple of years ago where I thought, oh, we're finally making a bit of traction. Particularly, I really liked seeing Ross Coulthart get out there and investigate everything and then release his book in plain sight. And then later on, within a couple of months, there was the Netflix series. But again, by the end of that 10 episodes, they kind of said a whole lot of stuff without saying a whole lot of stuff. And I think
Mhm.
they're getting very good at that, particularly with
Yes.
the recent hearings and stuff as well. They haven't really said much. I mean, that those few pages that they released were just very mediocre, very mediocre. And And this is where I think, I am quite keen to just deviate away from that, because I think some people, still believe in this, the whole like activism thing. We need to go out and push the governments and, all that sort of stuff. And I feel like they've kind of got their own agenda going on. But at the same time, I mean, I love what Avi Loeb says. He says the skies are not classified. You can literally walk outside your backyard and see them, with your own eyes. So we don't need any authorities to validate the truth that we already know is out there. And I think that's what makes organizations like MUFON so valuable in the community, because they give an opportunity to connect and be heard and not necessarily need it from the military or the government. Now, you've spent, quite a lot of time investigating these sorts of experiences. Can you take us through a couple of what you would consider most significant experiences that you've either heard or experienced yourself in your local area?
Well, those are two totally different things, of course. Let me mention one, maybe two that were local that I've heard from witnesses directly that I found to be quite compelling. There was a gentleman that I investigated his sighting back in 2005. Now, his sighting was in September of 2004, sightings, multiple. And he called MUFON 6 months later, very emotional, still very upset about what he had seen. And so I went out to his place with a couple other investigators and we heard his story. It was late at night in September, about 10 p.m. He said he was driving down a windy, curvy road with tall trees. And as he came around a bend, he suddenly found himself underneath a giant triangle. He said it was about the size of a football stadium, silent, had white lights at the vertices, red light in the center, just hung there absolutely silently. And he knew that it was a solid object because it blocked out the stars. And he wanted no part of it. And he floored it and he drove home, had a panic attack, he said. And interestingly, in the interim, before he had his next sighting the next day, several people reported sightings around Detroit Metro Airport. People who know what regular air traffic looks like, and we're seeing lights that were strobing and doing fantastic maneuvers. So the next day in the afternoon, this gentleman, it's about 3 in the afternoon, he gets up from a nap, looks out his window and sees what looks like a car driving over the tops of the trees at the edge of his property. And he gets a closer look. There's no wheels on this thing. It's got 3 portholes on the side and it's moving about the speed of a car. And he watches it until he can't see it anymore. He again has a panic attack. And when he gathers himself together, he's in his second floor bedroom. He goes downstairs into his kitchen only to find it parked right outside his window in the backyard. It was black, wedge shaped, again, 3 portholes. He could see it had a red light inside, some sort of mist swirling around, something that looked like a shadowy being walking around inside. And, so I asked, how long was it there? And he said for an hour. And I was like, wow, the obvious questions come next. Did you take a picture of it? I asked. And he said, no. He goes, for all I know, that this thing would think that I had a weapon and interpret it that way and feel threatened. So I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, did you call anybody? And he's like, no, after several minutes, I thought maybe it was stuck here and would know that if I was picking up the phone that I was calling in for reinforcements. And so afraid for my life, he goes, I just sat there for an hour, watched this thing. After an hour, it got up, cocked at a sort of a 45-degree angle, flew out through the trees, and that was it. Now, I was going to go out and because it landed, I was going to go out into the backyard with the other investigators and see if we could find any depressions in the ground or anything like that. The only problem was there was like 2 feet of snow in his backyard at the time. And so I offered to him, I'm like, we can come back in a couple months and check this out. That's no problem. And he says, no. He goes, I am through with this. This is your problem. I don't want to think about this anymore. I'm giving this to you. And so it was actually several years before I thought maybe I should touch base with him again. And it turned out he had passed in the interim, but his emotional response to what happened to him was just really off the charts, and it really affected me. In terms of another one, we had an interesting one last year where this happened in Linden, Michigan. A gentleman was driving down Linden Road. It was 3:30 in the morning. So it's pitch dark there. The houses are very few and far between. And as he's driving, this is a route he regularly drives too. He's actually on his way to work, and he sees up ahead a bright light off to the side of the road. As he slowly drives past it, he sees what looks like to him a silver monolith in the middle of the woods, just well, right off the side of the road, with five white lights doing this sort of circular swirling around this silver monolith, he said, in the field. And then when he passed it, an orange teardrop shaped light, the fat end and the bottom pointing on the top, he said very quickly shifted out onto the road behind him, almost like a guard dog. He said this thing was very large, this orange light, almost like saying, "Don't come back, just keep going." So he drives to work, comes back during the daylight, and when he drives past that particular exact area, he sees a 30-foot patch of dried grass right there. So we went out and we took soil samples and sent them to our lab in Missouri, and it came up that the grass was apparently killed by something that was identifiable man-made chemicals. And oddly, when we were there, when we came to visit the next day after his sighting, there were patches of grass inside this very large, like 30-foot field that were new. There was fresh growth. So it appeared that the grass didn't actually die because of this event, but was already affected prior to this. So, odder still, I guess, that this phenomena just decided to appear in an area of chemically killed grass. I don't know what to make of that. What do you make of that? That's really weird. I could go on,
It's very
but
unexplainable. I mean, I guess, people talk about crop circles and things like that as well, who knows? I haven't gotten too far down that road. But wow, that's quite incredible. And I think it is important to know what you mentioned, with the first gentleman, it can be quite traumatic, to have that experience. And I think what's definitely missing right now is that level of support. I mean, obviously, because the government isn't coming out and making anything official, when people have these experiences, you can put them into a state of crisis, because it's something that's very unknown. I don't want to get too far into that, in this particular interview, but I think there's definitely a big missing space out there where when people have these experiences, they can get the right types of support from trained professionals. Because I think that's really what needed. You need someone who's trained in trauma to be able to listen to the story and really help someone to come to terms with that. And I guess, if we want to go a little bit into the conversation of it is definitely a matter of when, not if, that more and more people start to realize that this actually is out there, and the impact of that is huge. I mean, I'd love to know, after your first experience, did you accept it? Were you traumatized by it? How was that experience for you?
well, my first experience was at age 2. So,
Right. Okay. You weren't
my
even old
very
enough
first
to really consider it.
yeah, my very first memory in life is being in my crib, a little gray guy coming into the room, looking down at me. I screamed for my parents. My mother told me to go to sleep, and as I just stared at this thing, after a moment, it walked out of the room. And this isn't any sort of thing that returned to me several years later, like, oh, I think I remember that. No, it burned into my memory at that time. And so, I came into this life with this burning question of what the heck was that? Who the heck was that? And it wouldn't take long before I had further experiences. Age 4, they came into my room one afternoon and actually pulled me out of my body and tested my ability to operate in a non-physical form. I know this is a lot for me to just casually say, "Oh yeah," and this half, but this has been part of my life now
Mm.
for forever. So I can easily talk about this as much as being on a soccer team when I was a kid. This is something that happened in my life, and I
Mm.
remember it quite well. At age 7, they took me on board, and I got a cut on my arm from that experience. I still have the scar from that. That was a really strange one. And yeah, after that, when I got into my teen years, it was off to the races. I was having experiences, sometimes multiple in a week. Um, and that was a really rough time for me. And then in my early 20s, sort of tapered off to an extent in my mid 20s. And now every once in a while, I'll have something happen. But there was definitely a peak decade when I was younger where I was having a lot of experiences. And it's a really strange thing because it's part of your reality. It's obvious, it's evident this is happening. You can't question it. You have experiences where other people are around. And, but some people are just like, nope, I don't want to hear about that. No, I don't think that's real. I'm like, that it's a very strange thing for somebody to say what you've experienced firsthand might potentially not be real. And
Mm.
then, on the other flip side of that, when you run into other experiencers who have encounters identical or nearly identical to your own, it's an amazing thing. Like, oh my gosh, that same exact thing happened to me. And it's a double-edged sword at that point, because on one side you're like, oh my gosh, I wondered if I was going crazy. But on the other hand, you're like, well, now I can't really deny that as easily,
Yeah.
because now this person claims the same thing happened to them.
So there's
That
no going back, right? Once that happens.
mhm.
Yeah, that's so powerful. When you were younger and you had this experience that when you were 2 years old, where was your mum at the time? You said that she yelled out to you. Was she in the room or outside the room?
Outside the room, in her bedroom just across the hall.
Okay.
My my father, didn't say anything, which was, I don't know, typical, not to say, "Oh, my dad," it was just, it was the way that, basically the household ran. If one of the kids had some issue, his mom, to
Mm.
the rescue. I've got 4 older brothers, and, the oldest 2, the 3 of us could go toe to toe in an experience, contest with all the things that have happened to us collectively. And then my middle 2 brothers, between them, 0, not a single experience.
That's so
So
interesting. Why do you think that some people have so many experiences and other people are completely oblivious to it? And in the same
mhm,
household too.
mhm. So I would cat. So I, on one hand would say, to me, I believe what happens to me is because it runs in my family, runs
Mm.
on my mother's side of the family particularly. However, what do you say to the fact that 2 of the 5 kids don't have anything at all happen to them?
Mm.
And I filled 2 books about my own experiences, and I have enough content for a third, and so one day that'll be out. And my oldest brothers, I try to put their stuff into my books too, and it's just a lot of stuff. And for some reason, the middle 2 brothers, I guess I have no idea what their private conversations are about the rest of us. But
Do they
yeah.
believe that
Mhm.
your experiences are real?
I think that they've sort of been worn down, is the best way to put it.
Okay.
At family gatherings when we would talk about this stuff, they know enough not to speak up, I guess,
Mm.
in opposition. But yeah, I think that they understand, because for them, the other brothers are their older brothers, and
Mm.
they looked up to those brothers growing up. And
Mm.
then to have me come and flank them on the other side with stuff. When I was growing up, there was a rule in the household that my oldest brothers couldn't talk about what was happening to them around me. They didn't want to scare me, influence me, whatever. If I had anything to share, which I did, they would listen, and with more understanding than I knew at the time,
Mm.
but that they weren't able to share. It wasn't until I got into my early teens that they started to be more open and share,
Mhm.
about their experiences, and I got to understand. I'm like, oh wow, it's not just me. That's weirdly reassuring that, a lot more is happening in this house. It just doesn't affect me, or hasn't yet.
I wonder if
So
the other two feel
mhm,
like they're missing out, you know?
it could be. I don't think I've ever asked that pointed a question. Um,
I'm just
and
curious. I mean, with 5 brothers in a household, they must be going through something. And
mhm,
if it was just one person in the family, it's easy for everyone else to just turn around and be like, oh, they're making it up, they're crazy, whatever. But when 3 out of 5 are having these experiences, then it sort of lends a bit more credibility. And I guess it
mhm,
also asks again those questions around why certain people are chosen over others. I mean, I've asked this question to so many experiences, and most of them don't really seem to know. You know, I mean, they have an idea that they're somehow connected with these beings, or there's some sort of reason that they're being looked after, or that connection is being held in this lifetime, but no one seems to have a response as to why, or what the purpose is of that.
And one of the things that I like to point out is the volume of experiencers there are. Just
Mm,
locally, I've met literally hundreds of other people who have had this experience. And, if that's telling, then how many thousands, I've even seen projections into the millions of people that have this type of experience. I'm
mm,
not sure about that, but I will say what's evident is it's a lot. It happens to some people. It's not just a dozen people in the world who claim something like this. It's at the very least several thousand people that have had this type of experience. And
mm,
and so a lot of times the question can feel like when asked, "Oh, why do you think you're special?" Well, I don't really. I don't know anything else. My first memory in life. This is my life. This is how my life rolls, but a lot of other people have this type of thing happen to so many that don't talk about it. I feel blessed that I am fully supported by family, friends, even in the workplace, that I'm able to talk. And so I do. I think it's helpful for other people, as many people who can join the conversation in the spotlight, I think should. And
mm,
so I'm glad to add my little part to it, but I think that as people get better connected, I think there's already a lot going on the internet connecting people together that you know over time it'll be so apparent that what's happening that it's not going to be a question. In fact, when people look to the eh, 20th century and the perspective of this phenomena, for example, they'll say, "Oh my gosh, that was so funny when those people thought that they were the only ones in the universe."
right, right, yeah,
I think
hilarious,
that's one of them.
right.
And even friends that I have that I grew up with, that I would tell stuff and they would listen politely. There was one time, this is actually what got me into MUFON, 1989. Me and two friends were in a Chevette that my friend drove. We were in front of another friend's house waiting for her to get off of work. It was February, so it was dark, fairly early. And while we were sitting there in the car, this blue ball of light at about the height of two telephone poles moves across the sky very slowly, kind of in a tumbling motion. Very bright blue light. We all three saw it. And then a white ball of light came and ping ponged all over the sky immediately following. And then that disappeared. And then a red ball of light came in the center of the sky, grew to the size of a full moon, which is quite large, right? And then shrank and then disappeared. We all three saw it. We didn't know what to do about it. One of my friends said, "Oh, maybe we should tell the police." I'm like, we're high school seniors, which we are. And so I said, I don't know that we should tell the police about this. And another friend said, "Oh, yeah, well, maybe we should tell the local Air National Guard base because there was one somewhat close." And I'm like, "Okay, so we're not going to tell the police, but we're going to go to the military." And so it was a few years later, 93, I found MUFON and reported, first of all, that sighting, and then went on to join them and really get hands on. In fact, there's so much I leave out about that particular sighting in '89. I'll just add this part to it. The next day at work, I came in and there was a coworker of mine, and I said, "Hey, you'll never guess what I saw last night." And she says, "Oh, did you see the UFO with Carl, our maintenance guy?" And I was like, "What?" I didn't expect that as her response. And so I sought him out, and he said he saw this blue ball of light moving in a sort of a zigzag pattern down his street the previous night. And then when I got back to my original coworker who told me to speak with him, I found her crying. And I asked, what's wrong? And she said that this discussion about UFOs, as small as it had been, it brought back this memory of when she was a girl growing up in Tennessee, where her parents were in the front seat of a car, her and her sister were in the back seat of a car late at night, and they were driving down a dirt road, and there was a 30-foot disc parked on the side of the road glowing. And she remembered her father was like, "Oh, let's go check that out." And the rest of the family is like, "What are you doing?" Yelling at him, screaming. And she said that it was something that has haunted her whole life, and she tries to bury it, but every once in a while it comes up, and I'm like,
Mm.
wow, this is really having a hold on my life, and so I wanted to investigate it as best as I could.
Yeah, wow, that's huge. And again, just, there's so many stories out there where people are having these experiences and not having the right support networks to even go to, or not having that reassurance of, that it's okay, that they can let it go, or whatever needs to happen. I really hope that particular person, has found a way to come to terms with that, because I think as we continue these conversations, not only on this particular show, but across, I guess, across the globe, there's more and more people talking about this. More of these stories are going to get unearthed, more of these experiences are going to come back, especially with people who have maybe suppressed their memories around it. Suddenly things will start to resurface, or they'll start to bring things up that they maybe didn't want to talk about. And I think part of that journey towards that contact again, which I believe we can choose to make contact. Some people like yourself just have it from a very young age, it's built into a part of your life. And yet there are other people out there who set the intention to actually have that contact. They go out and they watch the skies, they really, want to connect. And I think there is that pathway as well. And then somewhere in the middle, you've got all the people who've had these very, traumatic types of experiences, who don't even want to talk about it again, who don't want to go there. And I think that's why it's so important to have these open discussions, and to let people know that this is real, it's okay. You know what I mean? Like, just to sort of create that conversation around it.
Yeah, I think that if you have an experience for the first time that's up close and personal as an adult, it's a
Mm,
lot different than if you sort of grew up with it.
mm,
And most experiencers that I know are frequent flyers, if you will. They've had this experience all through their life,
mm,
and there's various degrees of comfort level with it, from feeling blessed to feeling terrified. But
mm,
I will say this, even for those people who feel blessed by this phenomena, if you wake up in the middle of the night with this ghastly face and giant eyes staring at you, there's never going to be an experience that doesn't have a little bit of being startled,
mm,
being put off, and if they, for example, if you got a postcard in the mail, say, hey, we'll be back, we'll be by next Wednesday, at 12 p.m. noon, and we'll have lunch, that's a lot different, but they
mm,
always come on their schedule,
mm,
in their own way. And so the people that have positive encounters, a lot of it is a situation where they write out what's happening to them at that moment and say, oh, I should feel lucky that that happened, or I feel good. And some people get healed, and
mm,
there's definitely a spectrum, and it's perfectly understood, even when the beings seem to be benevolent, and but getting people, off the road in the middle of the night, or from their home in the middle of the night, to start off by saying, with a sneaky approach, it's a barrier to trust. And I think they have a very different perspective than us about life in general. I think that they basically exist on a consciousness level,
mhm,
and that they're able to fill physical forms when it suits their purposes. And so that when these beings come to us, basically they probably have these sort of bio puppets that they put a spark of life into, and come and interact with us when their natural form is etheric. And
mhm,
so for them, I think they view our bodies as vehicles, like the way they view their vehicles, their
mm,
bodies as vehicles. And for us, so many people are into the ego of our own body and appearance and everything, you know. So when they come, they're like, they're confused, because they're like, what's wrong with you? This is just your vehicle. This isn't the real you. Why are
mm,
you so upset?
yeah,
And so I think that's the big breakdown in understanding that happens in this phenomena and sort of the negative spin that's put on it. Yeah, people have had legitimately bad things happen. People have had legitimately good things happen. But I think that's one thing that um, really needs to happen is that it's on us to understand a more consciousness based picture of life, and so that we can lift ourselves up to that level of understanding. And I've had experiences that are non-physical. For example, at 4, when they took me out of body, I think it was for that purpose. They're like, "Hey, this is where we're from," so to speak. And so I think it might have taken the edge off of a lot of the terror that I might have had on top of the discomfort I certainly had growing up.
Could you tell me more
As
about that specific experience? What happened for you? What it felt like
the at age 4.
at 4? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, did someone come in and physically pull you out your body? Were you sleeping? What happened there?
Mhm. So it was about 2 in the afternoon, I remember. My brothers were at school. I was not yet in school. My dad was at work, so my mother and I were the only ones that were home. And she was outside picking weeds out of the lawn, and I decided to go in and take a nap. But when I got in, right when I rolled into bed, at that exact moment, my entire body started vibrating and tingling, and then, I felt a pressure on my chest, and then I felt like I was being pulled out of body like a handkerchief out of, like, a pocket. And then I saw in the room 3 gray beings, and, they, um, were giving off, I would say the best way to put it is like a playful vibe, and they led me out into the hallway. I lived in a tri-level house, and so there were 6 steps into the TV room below. And, when I followed them out into the hallway, it was this weird sort of feeling, like I could tell that, my body parameters weren't there. I was just floating, and I floated out after them into the hall, and then they said, that they wanted to see how well I could float down the stairs into the room down there, and so I did, and, I floated down, and then I came to sort of a landing in a falling leaf pattern, and the beings, were very excited, like, "Wow, this is great, you did it." And so I'm like, "Wow, yeah, I'm gonna tell my mom." And they're like, "No, no, 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 don't tell your mom. This is just between us." And so then I felt the very strong tingling, like a jolt hit me, and, then I was laying in bed again, paralyzed, tingling, coming out of it, and then I walked out into the hallway, and I said, "Well," I looked around for them first, and I thought, "Well, they're gone. Let me see if I can do this by myself." So what I did was I laid on my stomach and crawled face first down the stairs to try to repeat the thing, and it was not the same. No, it wasn't the same. And I did actually wait a while before I told anybody else in the family. And then, after a while, I'm like, why? How come I'm not telling anybody? So I started to talk about it. And I think that there's a side of them that really takes notice. I've had out of body experiences happen through my life, often very brief, often unintentionally. What would tend to happen is I would try to attempt an out of body experience, something that my older brother Steve could do, and it wouldn't work. And then like a day later, maybe a few days later, it would happen spontaneously, as I lay down. And so I'm like, darn it, doesn't happen when I wanted to, but it is happening. So that's interesting. And I think it always caught the being's attention whenever I did that. I always got a very distinct sense of being watched. The I don't know how strange we're allowed to get on your show, but I
Strange
have
as you like. We're pretty far down the rabbit hole here. Yeah.
but, uh, another out of body experience that I had that I don't generally mention very often, but I was in my late 20s, and I was living in an apartment at the time with a girlfriend at the time, and I, got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and as I started towards the bathroom, oh, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself because I apparently don't tell the story very often. I came to awareness. This is where the story really starts. We'll get to the bathroom in a second. I came to awareness at a friend's house who was hosting an experience or get together. In Michigan, there have been groups that have been meeting for decades, actually, very privately to discuss their contact experiences. And I was part of a group at that time, but I came to awareness at this person's house, but I could tell it was a time before I actually even joined the organization. And looking around, everyone looks slightly younger, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what am I doing here at this house?" Which I totally recognized because I'd been there a number of times, and I recognized everybody there, and it was very lucid, very real. And I'm like, "This is strange." And then, one of the people that were there at the meeting, looked over at me, and I could tell he could see me, and it startled me, and then I felt like I was being yanked from behind and dragged very rapidly through time, on rails almost, and then I felt slammed into my bed, and I was like and then I woke up, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that was crazy. I have no idea what that was. Certainly wasn't a dream. It was excessively real." So this is where I led into before I got up to go to the bathroom. And I'm about halfway there and I realize I'm like, wait a second. I look back and there's my body in the bed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm out of body. And then I felt like 1,000 eyes were on me at that point. Like the beings were like, oh my gosh, he's out by himself
Were
without
you
us.
not supposed to be like that, or
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think
okay.
that they liked it when I
It's kind of
was
like
out on my own.
accidental. You just accidentally went out of body.
Yep. And so then the story gets weirder. So I turn around, I go back to my body, and as I get like within a foot of the bed, I feel a tingling in my body. I'm back in my body, and I get up, go to the bathroom, come back, and I'm laying there, but I can't get to sleep because I'm thinking at any moment these beings are going to come in. And I'm like, "Oh gosh, I did it now. I did it now. I was out and they're gonna come." And eventually I fell asleep. And the next morning I woke up and I look over and my girlfriend's giving me a very dirty look. And then I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on? And she goes, "I can't believe you." And I was like, I have no idea what's going on. So she goes, "I was having a very nice dream last night." And she goes, "You came running up and said that I needed her to hide me from the beings that were coming for me." And she said in the dream, like, "Why don't you just find your own hiding spot?" And I guess replied to her in the dream, "Well, they know me. They know how I think. I can't find a hiding spot that they wouldn't read my mind and know where I am." I'm like, "You have to find a hiding spot for me." So this is all in her. So she takes me to her parents' basement, and she said in her dream, she felt literally hours pass where we sat in her parents' basement with the lights out until I eventually said, "Okay, I think it's safe now." And she said she was so mad at me for doing that. But it was in her mind, it was all a dream. And I hadn't shared what had happened to me the previous night. That was her side
Why
of it.
was she mad at you? That's quite funny.
She was mad at me
But she
because
was
I
she
made
was having a
I
nice dream and suddenly you come and interrupt her dream state. That's
yeah.
hilarious.
Mhm,
And she had no idea what had happened. So obviously something in the astral plane. I mean,
mhm.
she was picking up on it. You was somewhere floating around in there and you guys had this kind of shared experience, which is quite yeah, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, it's just far enough out there that I don't generally bring it up, but yeah, it was one of those things. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's just out of the crazy things that have happened in my life.
Yeah. Trust me, not that crazy. I've had plenty of these similar type experiences being relayed to me through the
Mhm.
course of these interviews. So you're certainly not the first person on this show to say something like that, which is quite interesting because, again, when you get people with similar experiences, I mean, I've done quite a number of these interviews already this year, and there's a lot of similarities between the different cases. I had someone else on one of the other episodes also share something about an experience where they were pulled out of body and actually remembered having this interaction with beings in that out of body non-physical plane. And it was very detailed, actually. So yeah, I mean, if anything, it kind of just brings us back to this idea that yes, there are beings out there, but also what keeps coming into pretty much every conversation that I've had so far is this concept of the non-physical, or what I call, the multidimensional realm, like the multidimensional space where there is existence or life outside of the physical body. And I think, as much as, there are threads in ufology that really just want to focus on the nuts and bolts, the very physical 3D tangible experiences, the lights, the sightings, the craft, the things that you can measure. But I think there is so much overlap between that space and what you're describing, which is the non-physical, the consciousness, the etheric, things happening in the astral plane. And I think there's still so much mystery surrounding how those worlds actually come together, because I think they're very interconnected. Things that happen in the non-physical realm seem to have an impact on things that are happening here. And I mean, again, I'm left with more questions and answers. Well, how are these physical craft traveling interdimensionally? Are they going through time? Time travel seems to keep coming up. You mentioned something about going in time as well. And it just seems to be that there's more to this than what meets the eye, I guess.
Yeah, and really my two pet topics of interest in this area that I don't feel that I've fully been satisfied is quite a bit, and I haven't been told this specifically, that time doesn't work how you think it works, but oh boy, have I heard it again and again from other people that have experiences being told that time doesn't exist how we think it does. But I never hear like how time works. And they're like, you're mistaken, you wouldn't understand, blah blah blah. I'm like, try me. I want to hear somebody's account where these beings say, guess what, this is how time works, this is going to blow your mind. And then and then sort of chew on that. The other thing is the concept of free will. And that one's probably much more complicated. I hear a lot of stories of like saying like, we have free will, and then evidence within accounts that seem to be contrary to that concept. And I just want a greater understanding of that. I can only be vague about that without really unpacking it. And I whenever I hear time doesn't work how you think it does, or free will, anything, my ears always perk up. I'm like, okay, what have you got?
I love that. I feel like that could be a whole episode in and of itself. I do know quite a bit about both of those topics, which I'll be happy to share with you at some point. I think we do need to wrap up today's conversation though. So for anyone who's listening in, I mean, people who are curious and on the journey, what final words can you say to them that might be encouraging or advice for these people?
Yeah, you're not alone. You're not even unusual. You'd be surprised at the people around you that just the topic never comes up. But there are all sorts of people that are compassionately waiting for you to share, should you wish to share with somebody outside your circle. We're moving forward. We're clearly not alone, and I think I think we got this.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Bill. And thanks for, sharing your time, energy, and stories with us here today. So for everyone, I'll put Bill's links in the comments below. He is actually an author as well, has a number of books, some publications coming out soon as well. So you can go follow him on the links that we'll be posting in the description. Thank you so much, Bill. And thanks everyone for listening in. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to First Contact. I'm your host Ish Patel, and I'm so excited to have this conversation about open contact with extraterrestrial beings. Come join me in the Facebook community where you can continue the discussion, or keep listening for another episode of First Contact.